It's been about 6 months since the launch of the iPhone 15 Pro Max, and it's been about 3 months since I've personally gotten my hands on the device. And this phone has lived up to every single bit of expectation and hype that I saw in the reviews and unboxings for this thing. And today I'm going to tell you what it's been like to live with this phone for the last 3 months. And with the USB-C port, titanium build, action button, and even more, well, we've got a fairly big video today. And look, I'll start off now. If you hate this phone, we're not going to share that opinion. This video is not for you. I am absolutely in love with this phone. But that's not to say I don't have my complaints. So enough rambling from me. Let's get started.
Say that you love me, you liar. You are an ugly crier. If you were to be the last woman on earth, then I would turn Billy Eichner. Like, how can you always be tired? Like, you 23 and retired. Posting your coochie for rank. Can't blame you, inspired. I know that you're insecure.
Okay, so just so I can put this review into context, the phone I had before this one was the iPhone XR. And it was terrible. I tried to run 2 live activities once and it just completely locked up on me. I was on the bus, I tried to play a song and have a transit app open, and that was just too much. That thing was absolutely cooked. And a week before I got this phone, the XR screen died. It just fully stopped working, like it was bugging out. Essentially, I went from the iPhone 8 I used to replace that phone all the way up to the 15 Pro Max. It was a bit of a big upgrade. Probably gonna mention things that came around on the 14 Pro or the 12 or the 11 or whatever. This is more of a, here's my experiences other than here's what's better from the 14 Pro Max. I have the 256GB base model of the 15 Pro Max in the natural titanium. And this color's beautiful. I'll talk about that later. That 256GB is upgraded from the previous 128GB base model of the 14 Pro Max, which is also reflected in the price increase of the Pro Max line. The standard 15 Pro still remains at that standard 128GB base configuration from last year with the same price. Now, I'm gonna start off straight away. This phone is absolutely beautiful. From the matte glass on the back to the slightly curved grip for a more ergonomic feel to those brushed titanium rails that make the phone makes it so much easier to clean. This phone looks excellent. I did buy a case. I bought the Spigen Classic C1 case, and I've been using that for about half the time I've had this, but it feels so good caseless. The main protection I've had on this phone was a screen protector I bought off Amazon like a month after I got the thing, but I took that off because it was cracked and I wanted to shoot some B-roll. I'd say 10 bucks for another screen protector was worth it for the shots I got. I've been lucky enough to only ever drop my phone with the case on, where it was excellently protected by the case from the brand that survived a plane drop. I'm not going to do any drop tests. I'm going to leave that to the professionals, to the Jerry Rigs of the world. I'm also not going to prove, nor am I going to disprove, that the back cracks if I do that with a bit more force. But even after 3 months, there's not a single nick or scratch or any sort of damage to the casing or the screen of this phone. And I think that's partly because of the non-colored titanium colorway that I picked. I think if I had the black or blue titanium, any scratches that I got would have been much more obvious. And of course, the IP68 water resistant holds up well. You know, I've used it shower, pool, whatever. It still works, obviously. The phone's footprint is slightly smaller than the 14 Pro Max because of the smaller bezels around the display. Apple opted to make the phone itself smaller instead of making the display bigger with that advancement, and I think that was the right choice. The feel in the hand is really nice too, like I mentioned earlier. The curved edges make it much nicer to hold compared to the 13 and 14 Pro, making it more similar to the XR I was carrying before, and the lightness in the hand makes it feel like it could go anywhere. I'll be honest, I kind of like the heavy feel of the 14 and 13 Pro. Just kind of gives those devices that premium feel. And as my friend Alec put it nicely, the 15 Pro Max at 221 grams just doesn't feel like a phone you could throw at someone. But overall, I prefer the lighter weight of the 15 Pro line. It's just more practical to carry and use. I barely even notice it in my pocket. And realistically, I'm not throwing this at someone. If I need to do some damage, I've got my Steam Deck. Now, I don't even know if I need to speak about the performance of this phone, but I'm gonna do it anyway. The A17 Pro system on a chip on this phone is probably the most powerful phone that I've ever owned or even held. The new 3nm process, the 2 performance cores, the 4 efficiency cores, the 6-core GPU, and the 16-core neural engine lead to this device being an absolute powerhouse in daily use, and in edge cases like on-device console gaming. This B-roll that I'm rolling right here, there's no game streaming, there's no green screen tricks, that's just Resident Evil Village running on device. When I first got this phone, I immediately tried to push the SoC to its limits, running local LLMs, 3D renders with Polycam, RE Village all at the same time, and I could not get this phone to slow down. I've only ever really experienced reduced performance when the phone is thermally constrained, and that's not because of the phone, that's because it's summer in Australia right now, and the temperatures are like 35 to 40 degrees. I'll talk about thermal performance later. The 8 gigs of RAM on this phone is seriously helpful for multitasking. Apps running in the background rarely ever have to close. I could close an app, like the modded version of Apollo for Reddit, for days, and it'll still be exactly where I left off when I opened the app. On my XR, the same app could last barely an hour if it even decided to stay open. I'm sure you've already seen tons of benchmarks for this phone, but I ran some anyway. I also don't have any modern phones outside of this one, so my only comparison point is the M2 iPad Pro that I'd show you if it wasn't sitting on my tripod for the script. In Geekbench 6, running the CPU benchmark, the 15 Pro Max scores 2742 in single core and 6611 in multi-core. I also had an iPhone 13 Pro that I could run that wasn't mine. It was Alec, the guy who throws his phone at people. The 15 Pro Max scored over 400 more than the 13 Pro in the single core and around 1,000 points more in multi-core. The single core performance on this phone even beat out the M2 iPad Pro by just over 100 points, but the M2 still had that multi-core advantage, seeing as it scored over 10,000. Running 3D Mark with the Wildlife Extreme benchmark saw the device scoring an overall score of 3199, with an average FPS of 19.2. The iPad's GPU did thrash the iPhone for this benchmark, clocking in at 6325 and an average frame rate of 37.9. However, this phone has features that the M2's chip doesn't, like ray tracing, which isn't tested in that benchmark. I also ran some local large language model tests using Meta's Llama 7B model via private LLM, just for fun. When I asked the iPhone to write a 1,000-word essay on the impacts of climate change, it averaged 221.92 milliseconds per token across 3 tests. And when asked to write 5 facts about the iPhone, it averaged 161.61 milliseconds per token across 3 tests. Again, the M2 thrashed the iPhone here, running around 60 to 70 milliseconds per token for both of those questions. But that makes me excited for what Apple's going to do with the 16 Pro with, whatever on-device AI they decide to add in iOS 18, hopefully, please. Now, of course, you can't have a modern phone review without talking about the cameras, or in this case, 4 of them. One on the front. The 3 cameras on the back remain mostly unchanged from the iPhone 14 Pro, with the same 48 megapixel ultra-wide, with the same 48 megapixel main sensor and the 12 megapixel ultra-wide from that device, both of which have made their way to the base model iPhone 15 as well. While the iPhone 15 Pro keeps basically the exact same layout, including the 3x telephoto, the 15 Pro Max gets that all-new 5x tetraprism telephoto lens. I picked this phone over the standard 15 Pro specifically because of that lens, and doing that was probably the best decision I've ever made when picking an iPhone. As a huge concertgoer, that 5x lens is excellent for capturing photos and videos of the performer that can actually see the performer, because sometimes I can't justify spending thousands of dollars for front row tickets to Taylor Swift. And look, yeah, I can see the Samsung users from a mile away. Obviously the 15 Pro Max doesn't beat out the 10x optical zoom that's on the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. And I can't just lie to you and say that that phone has been beaten as the king of zoom by the iPhone 15 Pro Max, because that's just not true. As much as I would love it to be true, as much as I would love a better zoom lens on this phone, just hasn't happened yet. But this is still an excellent lens. And of course, taking standard photos and videos with these leaves the memories I capture coming out looking absolutely excellent. Compared to my XR, the camera actually launches instantly and takes photos when I hit the button most of the time. I only say most of the time because every now and then I open up the camera and the feed's just black. It's just not there. It's usually fixed when I close the app from the multitasking screen, but it's just kind of annoying, and I'm hoping it gets fixed in software soon. I haven't experienced it in a while, so it might have been fixed, but I can't confirm that. Luckily, if I need an urgent photo, I'm probably wearing my Meta Ray-Bans, and you can find the review for that somewhere in the corner. However, I still have my grievances with these cameras. The other 2 lenses are still stuck at 12 megapixels, which isn't great, considering the ultra-wide and the telephoto on the Pixel 8 Pro, for example, are both 48 megapixels. 8K shooting is also something that's hypothetically possible with the sensor and the processing on the device, but it's not available. It would have been a nice gimmick, but it's also not a huge deal breaker either. And as I mentioned earlier, God, I want to see more zoom capabilities on this phone. Back to the positives though, the 15 Pro Max has a ton of cool camera features, with my personal absolute favorite being the spatial video capture. The spatial video capture uses the ultra-wide and the normal lens on the device to capture stereoscopic 3D video that is then able to sync through iCloud photos to your Apple Vision Pro for you to watch in 3D, if you're lucky. If you're not lucky enough to have one of those and you don't have that $3,500 US lying around, Meta also recently added support for spatial video syncing to the Quest app, meaning you can watch those videos on your much more affordable headset. I find it strange that you can't take spatial photos in the native camera app, considering you can do it. The app Spatialify allows you to do that, but hey, I'll take spatial video. I've been recording crucial moments in spatial video, and it's going to be a game changer to watch those back in 5 or 10 years in 3D. Some changes had to be made to the iPhone camera layout to make this possible. Notably, the ultra-wide is now directly next to the standard lens instead of being on the diagonal like it was before. That hardware change is why it isn't available on all the Pro devices. The other video features introduced with the 15 Pro haven't really appealed to me personally, but I still think they're really cool. Obviously, ProRes log is really cool. I need to use that at some point to learn how to color grade. It's also kind of funny seeing a 2-second ProRes log video take up like half a gig in my iCloud. Shooting to SSD is also something I thought I'd use a lot more, but it's limited to ProRes shooting in the native camera app for some reason. But even if it was available in the camera app for normal video, the 256 gigabytes of storage that are on this phone have been more than enough for me. I've shot a couple of photos in ProRAW as well, and while I haven't actually played around with editing them yet, the processing that Apple provides still looks the exact same as standard photos, and it's nice knowing I have that flexibility in the future. I've saved another one of my favorite features for last, that being the next gen portraits. I never really took portrait photos on my previous phones, but I've been an absolute fiend changing standard photos into portraits on this device. That flexibility with choosing what photos I want to be a portrait after the fact, and choosing where I want to focus my camera is an absolute game changer for me. And portraits just in general have improved tenfold. The hair recognition is starting to pick up individual strands, and it's much faster to actually just take portraits now. I'm going to shut up for a second and get some royalty-free music on so you can take a look at some of the footage from this phone for yourself. Obviously, because YouTube is terrible with HDR, the HDR footage is back into SDR, but you should be able to get an idea of how great these photos and videos are.
Stay here on the ground, it's overrated. The cityscape escapes you with a sound. It's delineated. I waited at the station for an hour, but I won't make it. You take off on an updraft by the tower, and you overtake it. Every moment I see you on the rise, you're drawn across the sky. Now that ink has dried, I can't tell you why. Oh, Mimi, can you tell me there's an issue? I've seen it clouded all around you. Why can't you tell me there's an issue you've seen before? Oh, Mimi, can you tell me there's an issue? I've seen it clouded all around you. Why can't you tell me there's an issue you've seen before? And I can't tell you why. No, I can't tell you why.
Now, you'll need a screen to see those excellent photos and videos you're taking, and I'm not sure if you've noticed, but there is a screen on the other side of this camera. And it's a great one. The display has a 2796 by 1290 resolution, and basically everything you'd expect from a flagship device like this one. 120Hz variable refresh rate, up to 2000 nits of peak brightness outdoors, P3 wide color, Dolby Vision HDR support, and a fitting 6.7 inch screen size that makes using the phone just look fantastic. My personal upgrade, going from a 60Hz phone to this, is one of my favorite parts of buying this phone, and was actually one of the factors that influenced me to buy an iPad Pro instead of an iPad Air. More specifically on that display brightness, you'll get 2000 nits when you're in direct sunlight outside, making it dead easy to read outdoors, even with sunglasses on. You'll get 1000 nits of standard peak brightness and 1600 nits of brightness when watching HDR content. The dynamic island remains the exact same, no modifications there, and so does the 60Hz refresh rate on the base model iPhone 15. Now, you've no doubt heard about that if you were on tech Twitter last September, and mild take, that 60Hz is probably fine for that target audience. Go ask your average iPhone buyer what screen refresh rate is. And, hint, hint, if you're watching this video, that's probably not you. As someone who's daily driven both Android and iOS, I feel like I'm fairly well versed to talk about the always on display. I really like Apple's implementation of the always on display, despite the controversy it caused within the tech Twitter sphere when it came out. I trialed having the wallpaper off to make it more like a standard Samsung always on display, but I don't know, it just felt boring. I did end up turning off notifications on the always on display, but I left the wallpaper on and it looks pretty nice. Apple's clearly been having some fun with the stock wallpapers too, like the Unity Flowers wallpaper that came out with iOS 17.4. I also haven't really noticed a significant battery impact when using the always on display, which is nice. And of course, it's time to address the elephant in the room, USB Type-C. This being rumored, and the EU regulations that made it happen, were the reason I bought this phone instead of the 14 Pro. and it was absolutely worth the wait. It's been making itself useful time after time, from transferring files directly to an external SSD with USB 3 speeds to just not needing to carry Lightning anymore. I don't use Lightning ever. My AirPods, iPad, everything is USB Type-C, and it's excellent. It's been great too, just transferring gigabytes of 4K 60 video from Blackmagic Camera to my SSD in like a minute or two. As I've mentioned, this port also enables shooting ProRes video directly from the camera app to external storage. Pro tip, you can also shoot any type of video to an SSD with Blackmagic Camera. The USB port also enables you to charge other phones and accessories with a Type-C to C cable, which kind of makes up for the lack of reverse wireless charging that still remains a staple of flagship Android phones. USB-C took way too long to come to the iPhone. Like, just flat out, there's no excuse for how long it took. Especially seeing as Apple was one of the first companies to shove Type-C down our throats with the 12-inch MacBook that came out nearly 10 years ago. Now, both the iPhone 15 and 15 Pro have USB-C, but in potentially one of the most Apple moves of all time, the base model 15 is still stuck with USB 2 speeds, the same as Lightning. The action button probably would have been the big talking point of this phone for me if it wasn't for USB-C, but USB-C happened, so now it's here. The action button is something I thought I'd use a lot more than I actually do. I was fully expecting to have like all those shortcut menus and if my phone's like this it does something, and then if it's like this it does something different. I never ended up setting up all of that. I currently just have the action button bind to open the video camera on my phone, which lets me very quickly start recording video whenever I need to. There was a point where I was using it to open the app for the grocery store that I work at so I could scan prices and find items and things like that, but it just isn't practical to keep switching the settings every time I walk into the store. The action button has so much potential that I hope gets brought out in iOS 18 or in future updates. Multiple bindings would have been an absolute game changer. My perfect workflow involves holding the button for video, but then also maybe double pressing it to start writing an Apple Note. Being able to adjust what it did based on certain conditions like location would be a great addition as well, like being able to open the grocery store app when I'm at the grocery store and opening to the camera everywhere else. I'd also like to see the button repositioned to somewhere more reachable on future models. It makes sense for Apple to do a direct replacement of where the mute switch was, seeing as that's what it replaces on this phone, and that's the function it takes on out of the box. But I would love to see it somewhere that's easier to reach one-handed when using the phone. And now for potentially one of the most actually useful features on this phone for me, the battery life. This phone is excellent for endurance, and I can easily get a full day's or more out of this phone. The closest I've ever gotten to killing it was at night 4 of the Eras Tour, where my phone was left at 1% by the end of the night. This was after recording hours of 4K 60 HDR footage, and it held up excellently. In terms of battery health, I'm still at 100% capacity, after around 90 battery cycles, using a mix of both optimized and 80% limit charging. After school and at home, I'm usually ending my day at around 11:30 PM, with some charging using CarPlay and my MagSafe stands at around 20 to 30%. This is especially great compared to the iPhone XR I was using, which would require at least 3 to 4 charges by the end of the day. Before I get into pricing, I'll mention a few quick other things I've noticed. Starting with the speakers, hey, they're pretty good for phone speakers. They get decently loud and they sound alright. They'd be great if you forgot your Bluetooth speaker in the shower.
Like the wing of a sparrow or a plane drops down a couple feet again to catch the wind that still remains, but I'm left breathless anyway. I fight the world and didn't march until I heard the doorbell ring.
Compared to the $489 it costs to buy this brand new. The lack of function keys is also kind of annoying when you compare it to a MacBook keyboard, but I use a compact board at my desk that doesn't have function keys anyway, so I got used to it fairly quickly. I also wanted to mention some of the launch issues that plague this device. Specifically, one of the most common issues of overheating in third-party apps like Instagram and the phone freezing during the setup process. I didn't experience any of those issues. They've been fixed and already were fixed by the time I got my hands on the phone. The thermal management on this phone is pretty good too. The only time I've ever experienced thermal throttling because of the tasks I'm doing on the phone is when I was running AI tools like local LLMs and image generators for extended periods of time. I do occasionally run into thermal throttling because of the conditions around me. I live in Australia. It gets really hot here. I've had some major thermal throttling after attempting to run Zoom and Apple Maps on the same time using CarPlay when it was 35 degrees outside, probably hotter in my car, and the map frame rate dropped to what looked like 3 FPS, and the refresh rate had dropped to 60 Hz when I took my phone out of the car. I did also have some overheating issues while shooting my last video with Blackmagic Camera. It stopped my recording session after shooting 4K 60 for around 20 minutes in a nearly 30-degree Celsius room. Of course, I couldn't turn on the fan. I gotta get that nice audio. The pricing of the 15 Pro Max is very similar to last year, with the only difference being the removal of the 128GB base model. The 256GB model is now the cheapest Pro Max you can get, and that model clocks in at 2,200 Australian dollars or 1,200 US dollars before tax. If the 5x telephoto on the bigger screen size doesn't do it for you, the standard 15 Pro remains at 1,849 Australian dollars or 999 US dollars for the 128GB base model. And those have been my experiences with the iPhone 15 Pro Max. If you like this video, hit that button, and if you really like this video, maybe even hit subscribe. If you've stuck around this long, you might care about this. I've just hit YouTube Partner. This is a huge accomplishment for me and my potential future career path. It's just fan funded for now, no ad revenue yet. So if you want to support the channel, you can send a super thanks in the comments. If you've been sticking around for a while, you're the reason I get to say this. So thank you. And hey, if this is your first video, you may as well subscribe to stick around for the journey. If you want more content, you can click over here to check out my review of the Meta Smart Glasses, and you can click over here to see that time I tried to run Steam VR games on a Steam Deck. And because I'm a partner now, you can click somewhere else here to follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and everywhere else. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.